Once upon a time, and this is a true story with some embellishment. Once upon a time, a pastor fancied himself as having the spiritual gift of discernment, knowing right paths to take within the church. And his church had a problem. They had a great choir, but a new person had joined the church, and unfortunately, this guy, his name was John, wasn't he? Couldn't carry a tune and was very loud. It drove the choir kind of batty. They wanted to accept this guy, but he was creating a ruckus. Finally, the choir director came to the pastor and said, "Pastor, you've got to do something. We've approached this guy, but he won't listen." So the pastor thought, I've got the spiritual gift of discernment, so I guess I'll have to talk to him about the right course to take. So he prayed about it, thought about it, and he approached the guy quietly in his office one day. He says, "John, 4 or 5 people have told me that you can't sing." The man replied, "Well, that's nothing. 50 people have told me you can't preach." The ability to discern a course of action that is in tune with the will of God, as opposed to a course of action that is not, is always needed in the life of the Church of Jesus Christ. Such an ability is needed when the church is faced with an important decision, or when someone is in trouble and correct answers need to be found, or when a church is in some kind of danger and needs to be warned to be put on the right path. Those who discern effective ways to address these issues in the church probably do so because of an act of the Spirit of God, who bestows on such believers a special ability, a spiritual gift. It's called the gift of discernment. Now, this particular gift is mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, chapter 12, verse 10. This spiritual gift seems to enable a believer to distinguish what is true, appropriate, or sound from what is out of place, false, or even dangerous. Now, it's interesting that the word Paul uses to describe this particular spiritual gift is also used a lot in the Old Testament, in the Greek Old Testament, that is. And it always refers to what a judge did in reaching a legal decision about some problem amongst the people of God. We see Moses doing this in our text for today, in Exodus 18. In chapter 18, verse 16, Moses explains this particular kind of reasoning this way. He says, "When the people have a dispute, they come to me, and I discern between one person and another." That's the same word Paul uses to describe this gift. Later in Israel's history, the kings of Israel would also be trusted with this responsibility to judge between one person and another. For this reason, the young, inexperienced King Solomon, in our second text for this morning, when he first became king, he prayed for the special ability to judge or discern among his people justly. In 1 Kings 3:9, Solomon prays, "Give to your servant," that's himself, "an understanding mind to govern your people, to be able to discern," and the original text would read, "between good and evil. For who has a natural ability to govern this great people of yours effectively?" Solomon knew he needed spiritual help to be a good king. If we use Solomon's words, then an effective judge, or in modern terms, an effective discerner, is able to discern between good and evil. And don't take those two extremes necessarily literal. In other words, such a person is able to figure out what is right and wrong behavior, or what is correct or incorrect thinking, or what is true or false, or what is appropriate or inappropriate, or what will lead to the right path as opposed to the wrong path. Or simply that they are able to figure out what is the best course of action as opposed to what is the perhaps not so best course of action. They know the difference between good and evil. So when Paul uses the same word in the New Testament to refer to the spiritual gift of discernment, in effect he's saying that those who have this gift have this same ability of knowing the difference between good and evil. Now, in 1 Corinthians 12:10, where this gift is mentioned, Paul specifically calls it discerning spirits. Here Paul is not referring to what we today would call the spiritual world of angels or demons. The term spirit in ancient times often meant a kind of influence, a type of behavior. So for Paul, the phrase discerning spirits meant being able to make the most beneficial informed judgments on various influences, ideas, or types of behavior that existed in the world then around him in the Corinthian church. For example, this gift is used in Paul's churches to discern the difference between true and false prophecy. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 29, Paul says that the correct procedure for the hearing of prophecy during worship way back then was to let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others, other prophets, discern what is said. This spiritual gift was essential in order to discern between that which was a true word coming from God and a potentially false word that was only coming, well-meaning probably, but only coming from the mind of the prophet. The use of this gift ensured that what was heard and followed in worship was a true exhortation from the Lord and not just a well-meaning thought from a prophet who was simply coming up with something on his own. The one who had this gift discerned between good and evil, between good prophecy and evil, or not so good prophecy. Now, the exercise of this gift is important in the church today. All too often we read or hear of people who have blindly placed their trust in some church or some charismatic leader for their spiritual growth without question, only to be led down a path to error, harmful behavior, a distressful situation, or something worse. And so to avoid these situations, God has given us this gift, to some, the exercise of the spiritual gift of discernment. The gift of discernment is also essential when it comes to local church planning and management, where it is extremely important that the leadership of the church be guided by those who can discern the correct path to take. Also, the spiritual gift is essential to those who find themselves frequently in formal or informal counseling sessions. This gift from God enables them to give a sound assessment of a person's situation that cuts through the fog of uncertainty and doubt and arrives at a beneficial solution. So how does this gift work in the church? How does it manifest itself in the thinking process and behavior of a believer who has this gift? Well, the New Testament gives us some examples. We can paint a fairly accurate picture of what the use of this gift entails. I've got 4 points. Don't have a poem, but I got 4 points. First, exercising discernment involves almost a kind of hesitant attitude over what's being decided. In exercising this gift, the discerner does not quickly rush in to say yes or no. One who uses this gift first stops, steps back a few feet, and looks around. They consider various options and perhaps do some research. They check up on the matter. In fact, this word is often used in the New Testament, the word that Paul uses for discerning spirits. It's often used to refer to someone who is hesitant about doing something. In using this gift, one hesitates to consider the options. They're not in a hurry to rush to judgment. They are patient in discerning what's good and evil. What is the best way to go? And what is the not so best way to go? Second point is this. The spiritual gift of discernment involves a kind of healthy doubting. Healthy doubting, not an unhealthy, cynical doubting that seeks to tear down, but a healthy, honest doubting that seeks to search out a matter in detail, to weigh all aspects carefully, to place in temporary doubt one side of the issue and then the other, just to see how it looks. In fact, in several passages in the New Testament where this particular Greek word for discernment is used, it is translated as to doubt. This doubting is the action of a true judge who seeks to be neutral, who does their best to remove all the biases that they might have, if only for a limited time, that they may see all sides of an issue clearly. Third point, the exercise of this gift entails testing spirits. We read about this in the text of 1 John 4. This text tells us to test the spirits, or the ideas, or the influences, or the origins of what is in question. It means doing analysis, doing some research, being in prayer about matters, finding out what the Scriptures say, calling in those personal references on somebody's resume. Those who have the spiritual gift of discernment do not rely on hearsay. They do not rely on what somebody said, somebody said, somebody said. We, as imperfect people, unknowingly misquote and misrepresent issues all the time when we work in the church. One with this spiritual gift checks out things for themselves. They are responsible to get the raw data correct. Fourth point is, before making any final judgment on a given issue, one who has the spiritual gift of discernment is humble. Humble enough to realize that just because they might have this gift, it doesn't mean that they're always right. There must always be an element of humility in one who uses this gift. The use of this gift is a very subjective thing. God never guarantees that one who has this gift is infallible. They never make errors. We all make mistakes. One who has this gift may also at times be mistaken. With this gift, we may have special insight, but our imperfect humanness puts limitations on what our reasoning can accomplish. For good reason, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14:29 that during a worship service, every prophecy, that is, everything that's taught or preached, is to be discerned by the others, by the prophets, before it is acted on. Discerned by several who have the gift of discernment, and not just by one individual. It's always wise to get a second opinion on what one has concluded from those who have shown to be wise in the Lord. And last, one who has the spiritual gift of discernment needs to have courage. The courage to express their opinion in the right context at the right time. It takes courage to wait, and it takes courage to stand up and speak when the time comes. So, a hesitant attitude to rush to judgment, a healthy doubting of what is being considered, a testing of the spirits, the humility to understand that one may not be right in what they are thinking, and the courage to speak up. These are the traits of someone who has the spiritual gift of discernment. So what happens in the church when somebody uses the spiritual gift of discernment effectively? Well, disasters can be avoided, and truth can be arrived at. This same church I spoke of, again, it's there, but I've embellished it a bit. You'll be able to figure that out, I'm sure. This church got together and was faced with a very important decision to make. They had Meals on Wheels every weekday. They had a youth group outing. They'd go on mission trips. They had also special busing for senior citizens in their community. They used their van for everything, but the van was broken, and they had to buy a new one. And so they got together in a congregation meeting after much prayer. Some even fasted, seeking God's will. And the pastor opened his Bible, and there it was. Acts chapter 4, 32. And the believers were all in one accord. Well, there it was. God had spoken. They were supposed to buy a Honda, an Accord. It was right there in the Scriptures. And they didn't need a van because an Accord didn't make buses. Right? They were certain about it. Would God lie to them? Would the Scriptures lie to them? Would their pastor? Goodness, we all love the pastor. He seems to know what he's doing. Why would he lead us astray? And so they were all set on buying this one Accord. And sure, they understood it would be hard to get all those senior citizens into that small car. But the Lord had spoken. They were certain. So a vote came one Sunday afternoon at a congregational meeting to vote to buy an Accord. Well, there was much discussion and people were ready for the question to call for the vote, and suddenly one lady, a new person in the back row, stood up. And she said, "Wait a minute." She seemed a bit hesitant. She paused, and then she had the courage to go further. "I was just thinking, maybe we don't need a small car, like an Accord. Maybe we need a bus or a minivan, or maybe two, to meet all the needs that we're doing. So maybe we need time to table this motion and to explore the matter more fully." At that, many of the members objected. "What's the matter with you? She's new, you know. Don't you believe in scriptural authority? Would God lie to us? It's right there in the Bible, black and white. Yes, it's true we seem to need more vehicles than that. Yes, it does seem odd to put so many people into one car. But where was this woman's faith? Could not Jesus multiply the space in that car like he did the loaves and the fishes? Didn't he create the world in only 7 days? Didn't the whale swallow Jonah and Jonah was still able to live and preach? Was that woman in the back row really a Christian? Well, it was an uphill fight. That lady in the back row took some courage and kept to her objection, and she was able to table that motion until the next week. Of course, most were confident that when the vote came up the next week, it would be finalized. So that week, this person in the back row went out and researched what kind of a car an Accord really was. It was clearly too small for their needs. And she found a dealer with a great sell on used cars, where for the same amount of money that a brand new Accord would cost, the church could buy two well-used but very serviceable minivans. One had wheelchair access capability. This woman then went to some Christian scholars at the local seminary to see if they understood the passage in Acts chapter 4:32 in the same way as their church did. She found out that the other translations of Acts 4:32 didn't read one Accord at all. This phrase was only found in the translation that their church used, and it was worded this particular way. The professors there told her that in the original languages, the translation really said that the believers were all in agreement. One Accord didn't refer to a Honda car at all. It meant everyone agreed. The verse really didn't apply to this situation at all. What was clearly God's will to most in that church wasn't His will at all. So after weighing the matter carefully, looking at both sides, this woman from the back row began to see things in their proper perspective. And after much prayer, she decided to speak out on this issue at the next meeting, gathering all the data and information that she had. Well, with a lot of help from the Spirit of God, which changed a lot of hearts that next meeting, her argument won the day. The pastor and the congregation finally agreed that, you know what, she was right. And they should buy two church vans, not one Accord, and the matter was settled. And finally, ironically, these believers were all in one accord. Today that church is still around, busy serving the kingdom, giving rides in their two minivans to numerous folks in their community. And when they think back on that somewhat contentious church meeting years ago, when they were ready to buy a Honda, they all scratched their heads and said, "What were we thinking?" The woman from the back row exercised the gift of discernment in large measure and to great effect. Now in that church, she's an elder on their session. She exercises the gift regularly in the decisions the session makes. She's not always right. She doesn't have all the answers. But she has taught that session by her actions that to figure out the right course, you need folks that know the difference between good and evil. So today, the question I would like you all to ask yourself is this: Lord, do I have the spiritual gift of discernment? Do you know? How do you approach problem solving in your family? in your church? With your spouse? Do you show a hesitant attitude to rush to judgment? Do you show a healthy doubting of what is being considered? Are you able to test the spirits? Do you have the humility to understand that you may not be right? Do you have the courage to speak up? If you do, you probably have the traits of the spiritual gift of discernment. If you have this gift, this church needs you. We need you serving as an officer somewhere in this church. We need you helping out. We need you serving and giving guidance to those who are doing the ministries of this church. We need you to always give us an alternative view to discover whenever the rest of us might be off base, totally convinced that we need to buy a Honda. Don't hide God's gifts under a bushel. Let your light shine, and shine brightly. The kingdom of God is counting on you. We need people serving in this church who know the difference between good and evil. In the name of the Father,